All right, welcome to our first webinar in a series of webinars that we are hosting as Promise 54. Thank you all for joining us on this inaugural webinar series. Today we're going to spend some time going through how to humanize your performance competency framework, spending some time going through how you might think about your competencies, how you are evaluating your folks, in a more human-centered way. For our time together today, wanted to share with you a little bit about Promise 54 and who we are as an organization to start with, so that you had a sense of who we are if you're not familiar with who we are as an organization. And so Promise 54, we help adults to thrive so that they can do their best work. 54 comes from Brown versus Board of Ed being in 1954, and us fundamentally believing that we have yet to live out the spirit intended behind Brown versus Board of Ed, as evidenced in the disproportionate outcomes, predictable outcomes across the board. Promise 54 does that through three main areas of support. One is a cohort experience. We have had several different cohorts over the years. Our main cohort is an annual national cohort called the DEI Accelerator. We have also had some foundation-sponsored cohorts, as well as some geographical cohorts. So we've had a geographical cohort in Denver as well as in DC, and I'm so excited to see some familiar faces from those cohorts. We also do research, and a member of our research team, Lyle Hurst, is on with us today. And so many of you may know us from our two national reports, Unrealized Impact and Unrealized Impact 2.0, where we were able to share with the field some of our findings of what experiences are across the field in indices of diversity, equity, and inclusion, some of our promising practices coming out of that research. And the way in which we partner with most of our organizations is through tailored organizational support. So one-on-one support with a team tailored around your particular organization's challenges, root causes, and finding a path forward. So a little bit about us and how we partner with organizations. Today, you have a team of folks with you today. You're stuck with me. My name is Unzug Becker, she, her, hers. I'm a partner coming to you from the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. I'm a proud oldest daughter of Korean American immigrants, born and raised in Boise, Idaho. Being the oldest daughter and the eldest of immigrant parents means I am a constant recovering know-it-all, and you'll see different ways in which that shows up. But I'm also a former educator, a partner, and a mom. My husband and I have a biracial son who is our rainbow unicorn sparkle boy, and the true reason why I do the work that I do every day. Every day we have conversations about what it means to instill as much confidence in him to be unapologetically who he is, while trying to not be naive to the ways in which he has and will continue to be received in this world. I am honored to share facilitation today with my colleague Jody. I'm going to give her a chance to say hello and introduce herself quickly.
Thanks so much, Unzug, and hi, everyone. My name is Jody Harris. I use the she series of pronouns, and I'm joining you today from my home in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live with my energetic 3-year-old boxer, no longer a puppy, and my fiance, Will. I am an associate partner here at Promise 54 and came to this work after nearly a decade in early childhood education. I wore many hats in my previous organization, including the development of a DEI strategy and programming to support a nationwide network of Head Start programs. And I am the daughter of an educator. My mom taught for many years, but also served in administrative roles in districts across the country as we moved from a couple different locations throughout my childhood. And that really instilled in me this commitment to kind of really understanding the ways that we all continue to grow and change throughout our lives, the ways that we have capacity to shift and reshape the worlds that we live in, and our ability to continue to fight towards equity in every kind of step of our journey. So really excited to be continuing this work with Competency 4 and to be exploring this idea around performance management and competencies with you all today.
All right, should also note that we have two other team members on our call today. Our esteemed colleague, Louis Gordon, is on with us, helping to manage our operations. And we also have our colleague, Samuel Biden, who has helped plan and create the session that is in front of you today. So those are the folks that you have from FAMAS 54 today. A huge part of how we engage with organizations is making sure that we've got some community agreements. And so for today's session, we are inviting you to try on the following agreements. One is speaking your truth and recognize that we are engaging across lines of difference, which means multiple truths may be held at the same time, given each of our unique lived experiences. We also want to invite you to get curious and avoid judgment. This is a point in time where we are spending time together with folks from across the country, some of whom we might know and some of whom we don't. And we want to honor each and every person's different experiences. The next one is often hard for me as a checklister, a self-appointed checklister. Expect non-closure. Consider this as an appetizer, not the full course. In 45 minutes, we are certainly not going to be able to address and solve all of our competency questions and challenges. But we do want to give you enough of insight to start to get your wheels turning and hopefully support your thinking in your own competency frameworks at your organization. And lastly, we invite you to mind the brilliance in the room. Promise 54 will admittedly tell you from the very beginning that our role in partnering with any organization is to try to create the space and facilitate conversations. But at the end of the day, you all are the experts of your organizations. You all are the experts of yourselves. We are simply here to try to create the space for you to show up fully and engage fully. And so that means that while we have content planned for you all, there will be moments where we will often be open to the direction we carry each other and meet the needs of the folks that are on this webinar today. We don't have a lot of time together, and that is why we have these agreements. Just as important as it is to align on what we are talking about, how we engage with each other is going to be equally as important, and that is why we have these community agreements. If you have agreements that you also need in order to fully engage, please let us know as facilitators. The chat feature is open on Zoom, so we invite you to share any other agreements that you might need in order to fully engage. For our time together today, in our 45 minutes, we have two objectives for our time together. The first objective is to understand just the components of a competency framework that centers excellence and equity in staff performance. Both are possible. One does not have, these two things do not have to be mutually exclusive. We also want to explore ways to embed DEI principles into your organization's competency framework. So we're going to do that by spending some time here doing some introducing and some framing. We are going to spend a little bit of time diving into DEI infused performance management and with an opportunity for you all to do some Q&A with us and with each other. Like I said, we want to mind the brilliance in the room, and by no means do we assume that Jody and I have all the answers. In fact, any of you on this call who know us, who know me, know that I have very few answers. I have lots of non-answers to lots of very targeted questions. All right, so we want to engage with each other. We would love for us to engage in a chat storm. So some of you already shared as we were logging on, but would love for you to share your name, your pronouns, your location, and a recent achievement or celebration. And that can be work related, that can be personal, whatever you would like to share with this group today, your name, pronouns, location, and a celebration. If you could put that in the chat, we would love to start to create a sense of community together. Happy work anniversary, Philip. And happy anniversary to you, Aid. That's a important board role. Happy birthday, Jen. Oh, piano recital. Nice, Yolanda. Wedding dress shopping, going on a run. Oh, these are so fun. Also, I'm finding myself inspired to get out and do some things this weekend. Also loving the Colorado representation right now. Oh, I love it. Thank you, everyone. Right, keep those check-ins coming. Would love to see where everyone is joining us from, what you're celebrating. Having that sense of community and celebration, shared celebration and connection is so important as we spend our time together today. I am going to pass it over to my colleague Jody, who is going to walk us through aligning on some key concepts.
Thank you. So yes, please keep those celebrations coming. It's lovely to get to connect with you all in that way. And before we move into thinking about how we humanize your performance management framework, we really want to spend some time aligning on these key concepts that inform our perspective and our approach to this work. So as we think about kind of a performance competency framework, we really want to start with kind of examining kind of what it is and what it includes. So we think about this as an organizational tool that outlines behavior and skills that are necessary for staff to really perform their role successfully. It can serve as a communication and a planning resource to help staff understand what success looks like within their role, and is often kind of a foundational tool in performance management processes to support folks in examining where they are and thinking about what growth and development look like in their positions. So most performance competency frameworks contain multiple competencies that the organization has identified as being really relevant or prioritized within their context. And it provides a shared language that can really be useful for staff and managers to have some really meaningful dialogue around progress, and to think about also how to mitigate bias in assessing performance, and kind of given the framework specificity and grounding in the organizational values and mission. So as we think about this framework as a tool for our communication and really thinking about how it can support staff development, we want to think about kind of how we examine the structure of a competency. So the competency components itself includes kind of specific characteristics and attributes or skills that contribute to effective performance in a particular role. And so on this next slide, the competencies that we're thinking about can be either knowledge-based related to understanding concepts or principles. It can be skills-based related to performing specific tasks or activities, or they can be behavior-based, thinking about the related attitudes, values, or interpersonal skills that we are looking for staff to embody. And it can be really helpful to think about and really be intentional about which of these types of competencies an organization is highlighting for staff, and thinking about how they correlate to specific roles. Really being intentional about kind of the comprehensive set of knowledge, skills, and behaviors that an organization wants to see, and considering what the competencies themselves reflect about an organization's values. So the example we have on the screen here is data expertise, and this would be considered a knowledge and a skills-based competency. So we both need to kind of understand what data we're looking at, how we might use it, and we need to be able to have the skills to analyze and use the data within our context. So this is just an example. We're not focused on the critiquing the language of the competency right now, though we will look at that a little bit later to dig in further. But we really want to just highlight again the structural components of a competency. So next we want to look at the description component. So this competency name influences how its description is designed. Descriptions can help us provide a clear understanding of what each competency entails, kind of what it looks like in practice, and they outline the key components, the behaviors, the actions that demonstrate proficiency in that particular competency area. So strong descriptions are directly aligned with the specific job or role that's being evaluated, and they reflect the critical competencies that are necessary for success in that position. And tie back to the overall goals and objectives of the organization. So we really want to get specific around the descriptive language so that it's contextualized within the organization and really help someone understand what it looks like to perform that competency within their role and their organization. Effective descriptions often include observable and measurable criteria for assessing competency at different levels. And that allows folks who are doing the evaluating and managers to make more fair and consistent assessments of their staff. So they have some consistent criteria they're looking at, and they can then utilize that to really ground performance discussions in there. Hearing a little bit of an echo, but I think we're okay. Okay. As we think about the structural component of the description, the next item we have, it relates to the specific behavioral indicators and correlating that to the performance levels within a particular role. So these behavioral indicators are the descriptions or indicators that clarify what each proficiency level entails and provide examples or observable behaviors that demonstrate proficiency at each level. These descriptions may outline different levels of or stages of competency that might range from entry level, just beginning in your role, to mastery. And so they provide this clear opportunity for kind of understanding what a growth trajectory might look like across this particular competency. So this allows for differentiation and provides a framework to assess an employee's growth and progress over time. And so again, helps kind of break down for folks what exactly this competency will look like in practice at various levels of implementation. So traditional performance management models will align the proficiency level and the behavioral indicator in a matrix where numerical values can then be assigned. So we have this next category here of the kind of proficiency levels in the framework that you see here on the left. These include kind of descriptions or indicators that clarify what each proficiency level entails and provides examples or observable behaviors that demonstrate proficiency at each level. So the descriptions can outline different levels or stages of the competency, and they, again, provide this framework to assess growth. And then lastly, we have these numerical ranges. And so if we look at the items on the right-hand side, the numerical values are often assigned in performance management ratings to provide a standardized and quantifiable way of evaluating employees' performance. So if we think about assigning these numeric ratings, it allows for easier comparison and benchmarking of individual performance across teams and departments or the entire organization, and often can create this clear and tangible measure of an employee's performance, making it easier to really communicate feedback and also to track progress over time. They can serve as kind of the basis for making decisions related to promotions, to salary increases, and performance-related rewards or consequences. But it's important to note that numeric ranges ideally would not be the sole basis for evaluating employee performance. And ideally, they should be complemented with the qualitative feedback component, with ongoing coaching, with the holistic assessment of an individual's contributions and skills and potential in the organization. So we're not kind of limited and kind of summed down to a number to evaluate kind of how we're doing. And so the use of these numeric ratings ideally would be supported by clear performance criteria, regular performance discussions, and a fair and transparent performance management process that combines those numerical ratings with this more broad and holistic feedback and support and assessment of performance. So I know that's a lot to think about and kind of in terms of the components of a framework, and folks may be familiar with those, but we wanted to create some shared language around the structure of a competency as we think about what it looks like for us to really, again, center DEI and think about humanizing this framework in the context of your organization. I'm going to pass it back over to Unsec to walk us through.
Thanks, Jody. And in case folks missed it in the chat, there is a bit.ly link to a workbook where you can take notes, and there are some reference slides if that's helpful for you. Every person learns differently, so if listening is your jam, please just go ahead and follow along. If taking notes is helpful, there's a bit.ly. It will prompt you to make your own copy, and that way you can take notes and they're yours and no one else has access to it. All right, so the reason you're all here, how in the world do we create a performance tool that's equitable and responsive to the experiences of those being evaluated? When we talk about DEI-infused performance management, we're really referring to incorporating the principles and practices of DEI into the process of evaluating and managing staff members. And that means we're really trying to aim to ensure that performance management tools are fair, unbiased, but also inclusive, taking into account the diverse background, experiences, perspectives of staff members, knowing that no one identity is a monolithic experience, and that means that it can be tricky. So one approach is our approach. I say one approach because by no means are we trying to imply that this is the approach. This is one approach that we can offer for you today. And when we think about humanizing your competency framework, what we are aiming to do is designing a framework that focuses on both assessing and developing a diverse staff with respect to their humanity and your organization's goals. What we're trying not to do, what we recommend folks not do, is simply adding DEI competencies, i.e. an inclusive leadership chunk in your performance management system. What that can often lead to is an unintentional checklist type of evaluation. It doesn't necessarily fold into your evaluation process the ways in which you're showing up. So this generally, our approach can generally be applied to every performance management framework since it really is pressure testing the structure, not the content. And so we're going to spend some time zooming out to consider the feelings and experiences of the user rather than focused on the output of the system. Sometimes as HR generalists, we can get hyper-focused on the system itself because that is what we are responsible for. It makes sense that that's where our attention is. And where the rubber hits the road is the actual experience of the user. Oftentimes, the values of the organization and overall purpose of the performance management system impacts what changes and makes the most sense. So how do we encourage growth and development in our performance management tool? So we are going to try on some things here. So we are going to explore the nexus of developmental and evaluative performance management structures. So on the developmental side of things, it focuses on growth, progress over time with the objective of facilitating learning, personal development. In the ed sector, for a long time, growth mindset versus fixed mindset was a hot topic. And so when we think about more growth mindseted mentality, that's going to be on the developmental side. On the evaluative side, you've got more things like assessing, measuring the effectiveness or quality of someone's performance. And so when you think about developmental side, we are thinking about phrases like coaching oriented, supportive in nature, encourages growth. On the other side of the evaluative side, we are using phrases like gauging for mastery, encouraging outcomes and deliverables. And to be clear, we are not saying one is more important than the other. What we are offering is that it's important to have a balance. So when you think about what's the right balance, we don't want to pendulum too far, too evaluative, and things start to feel too high stakes. I don't know about you all, but I have been in situations where the evaluation felt so high stakes that I constantly felt like my toes are being held to the fire. And no one performs at their best when they're constantly feeling like their toes are being held to the fire. People often tend to avoid giving direct feedback. Feedback can sometimes be described as being weaponized. And on the flip side, if feedback, if your performance framework is too developmental, feedback can feel like it's living in the land of the nice. It can feel like it's lacking accountability for successful evaluation of someone's job function. Essentially, inclusion and equity without parameters is actually not inclusion and equity. So when we think about how is performance assessed at your organization, when you think about how your organization is situated, where do you think your current organization falls? How is performance assessed at your organization? So if you are able, would love for you to use the stamp function. For me, I see a green box at the top of my screen that says I am viewing Lewis's screen. If you click on view options, you'll see annotate and then stamp. And if you could choose a stamp and then just identify where you think your organization stands in your performance framework. Are you more on the developmental side, evaluative, in the middle? And there is no judgment, shame, or blame on where you put your stamp, but just curious, where do you think your organization lands? Right, so we're seeing some across the board. It looks like they're more developmental than far over to the evaluative. Got lots of energy towards the middle here. Would love to invite some folks, if you are feeling brave, to either come off of mute or put in the chat. Based on where your organization falls across this spectrum of developmental versus evaluative, how do you think staff members feel about how their performance is currently being assessed? And what direct experience or observations inform your answer? How do you think your staff feels given your current framework of where your performance framework is? Put your thoughts in the chat, come off of mute. Seeing lots of pensive looks on faces right now.
I can go, just because I don't like silence. So I knew it's making me uncomfortable.
Thanks, Jen.
But also, I think we're still developing our system, and I feel I put us a little bit more on the developmental side because we're trying to have more like conversation, collaboration. But I also wonder if maybe that isn't, like you said, there's not enough accountability or structure, and so our staff might feel like they don't really understand the tie between how we're saying their performance is and how they're doing and how we want them to continue to grow to like promotions or salary increases or things like that. So this is helpful to see, like, really it should be a little bit of both. I think we're a little concerned. We don't want to be too evaluative and too structured in our system, but yet structure isn't a bad thing. And I think it is helpful to make it a little more clear. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Jen. Wrote it, so Jen, as you were speaking, some folks added some things in the chat as well. And so I think it looks like there's some things around a need for consistency and transparency, as well as having some clarity on how to actually improve. What are the actions to actually improve? I think most folks in my experience are very receptive to constructive feedback if they have an understanding of how to improve. No one wants to be told that you need to get better, but have no idea of what that means to get better. And so when we think about what that actionability, that transparency, just catching up, looks like there's some more chat here. Oh, interesting. Summer, I love what you put in here around, we have performance assessments, and then you have assessments of your portfolios, where the real assessment happens. And so I think that's also a place where, and we're going to get into it, this is often where we have to find balance of what are we assessing, how do our values show up? And by values, I mean both stated and lived values. And I think Summer, the example that you put in, shares some of the stated values are likely what is going to be evaluated in your performance assessment. And my hunch is there might be some unstated under the surface values that are being assessed through your portfolio assessments as well that may or may not be as transparent and clear. Right. Loving all of this sharing in the chat. Thank you so much for all of these examples. All right, so we're going to go on to another topic here. So the next thing that we want to chat about is around, hold on, I have a tickle and I'm going to go on mute for just a second. All right, excuse me. It's allergies. I promise I'm not sick. All right, so based on where your organization is right now we want to take a look at how do you want your performance to be assessed at your organization? Where would you personally want your performance framework to be in this scale? So same stamp feature, where would you want your assessment to be? And as you are stamping, would love for you to reflect on where would you like your organization to be? Is there a gap between current state and future aspirations? Based on what was just shared on the last slide, my guess is there is a bit of a gap. And if your organization fell onto part of this spectrum, how do you think staff members would feel about how their performance is being assessed? All right, so lots of energy around right in the middle. We want to feel like we can develop and grow, and perhaps still want to have some clear guidance around some accountability. Thanks for that comment, Amy. Would love to do a quick nonverbal check. If you're on camera, you can just do it physically. If you're off camera, you can use the gestures, but would just love a show of hands. How many of you believe that there is a gap between current state of your organization's performance framework system and future aspirations of where you would want it to be? How many of you believe that your organization has a current gap? Right. Seeing lots of hands, seeing lots of head nods. Yeah. Right, thanks. All right, so let's spend some time talking about what some of our recommendations might be around how we start to move towards a more balanced framework. Is there anyone who might want to dust off their teacher voice and read what's on the screen?
I can, Unsunk.
Thank you.
Humanizing your competency framework is striking a balance between development and evaluation. The aim is to center humanity while also holding people accountable to the organization's goals.
Thank you so much. So the key here that we really want to hone in on is the fact that centering your performance management processing through a lens of staff experiences is going to help lend itself towards aligning with a more balanced approach. At the end of the day, I don't know anybody who doesn't show up every day and doesn't actually want to be held accountable. I think most people do want to be held accountable if they feel like that accountability is fair, centers their humanity, and there's a clear sense of what to do if one is not meeting expectations or meeting what is expected of them. As an organization, let's go into some ways in which you might be able to plan to encourage development of your staff. So on our next slide, we're going to try some things on. Try it on with our sample competencies. So here in front of you, we've got some data expertise type competencies. And so would love to have you take a look at what you see on the screen. I'm going to ask some questions. As you look at this in front of you, what aspects of this framework positively resonate with your past experiences of being evaluated? And is there any you would change if you could? Let's start with those two questions. So what aspects of this framework positively resonate with your past experiences of being evaluated? And is there anything you would change if you could, based on what you see? It can be in the chat, it can be coming off of mute. What resonates with you, anything you would change?
And so I've been sort of grappling with this concept of like the accountability piece in general, right? Like, do we actually need the accountability? Like, you know, what about for those of us that like would have our own internal accountability? So I look at these and I'm like, this feels very high on the accountability and less on the development. And I feel like I would be annoyed if this is how I was being evaluated. And, but the other thing that I'm kind of grappling with is, and this is something that I grapple with a lot of, like, that is how I would appreciate being supported as an individual, which is not necessarily how everyone might feel about being supported as an individual. So this feels like a little bit checkboxy to me. And I think it would sort of like it would make me want to go do the check marks. As opposed to like really thinking about what would it mean to be using data in a way that was helping to move the organization stronger. And I could imagine other folks reading it and being like, oh, finally some clarity about what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Laura, when I read this, this description, what I see on the slide, definitely meets that. I just want to know what's expected of me. And so on one hand, it is clear. On the other hand, being a recovering perfectionist, if there is anything besides exceeds standards, even satisfactory would feel like a failure to me, because that is just part of the brokenness that is UNSUC. And unsatisfactory would just debilitate me. I would be under my desk sobbing. And so when I think about, is it clear what is expected of me? Is there accountability? Absolutely. Does this language work for me as a human? No. And like you said, Laura, for some people, it might be exactly what somebody needs to motivate. Some people are very motivated by this language. But when we think about the purpose of humanizing competencies, the user experience, I think there are opportunities to perhaps come more to the middle of that spectrum that we were just looking at. Let's dive a little bit deeper here. We are going to go into when you think about proficiency levels, and we have things like unsatisfactory, needs improvement, satisfactory, above average, exceeds standards. Depending on when I think about how might these terms of definition influence the experience of the staff? Are these words, are these terms going to be conducive to coaching? If I'm trying to manage somebody through a coaching lens, Are they going to correlate between encouragement and development, or is it strictly evaluative? Is there language in between? Lewis, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I just realized what time it is. We also want to think about DEI. So when we think about this language as well through some identities, if I were, based on, depending on my identity as a woman of color, a daughter of immigrants, how might this feel? How might this language feel? Depending on positionality, if I'm a more junior staff member, these words might feel more punitive than growth oriented. And so we are going to go to moving towards some promising practices. And so when we start to think about what are some language that might support that evaluation, but also support the growth and encourage coaching, we can try to play with that language. So I'm curious, words or phrases that come to mind as you see the difference in the two columns between the teal column and sort of that orangey red column. What are some words or phrases that are coming to mind as you see the shifts there? Or equals more encouraging, on a pathway of growth, asset-based. Other words or phrases as you think you react? Oh, Lorraine, I love this. Building competence over time versus someone else's assessment or bar. Elena, I appreciate the calling out, moving away from a potential binary and assuming that there's growth from all. All right, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jody, to walk us through some more content.
So we also want to take a look at the specific behavioral indicators descriptions that are in this document, which I think I saw folks kind of reflecting on in the context of the broader framework. And so we have, again, these categories of unsatisfactory, needs improvement, et cetera, which kind of examined how we might think about those differently. As you read the actual descriptions, I think some of the things to consider is how does the behavioral indicator descriptions land for you? And what feelings does it come up? What feelings come up when you kind of read them, thinking about if you're in the seat of as the person receiving this, kind of how that would land depending on where you're assessed in your performance evaluation. And so some of the considerations in particular, just thinking about your own systems, or how might this land for someone who is struggling in their role? How might this land for someone who's thriving in their role? What dynamics might that create based on, again, the way the language is integrated here? And again, thinking about this identity component, how might kind of the intersectional identities of your staff, how would this language land for someone who holds a marginalized identity or who might be kind of experiencing this feedback or this assessment process in a way that impacts their identities? And so thinking about those questions, we want to think about like what it might look like to really humanize the behavioral description language and what the language might include. And so some things that we're thinking about as we're examining this is kind of what are some of these kind of changes we can make to emphasize the development and growth aspect rather than a sole emphasis on the evaluation component. So how might the language that we use to describe the various levels within the competency framework really emphasize the opportunity for folks to continue growing and developing? And how can we kind of pivot from some of the potentially punitive language to more supportive and engaging language that can support folks in thinking about the opportunities for continued growth over time? And again, as we think about this language as well, another thing that we kind of see being helpful in the process of humanizing is thinking about the lens of cultural competency and examining kind of which words that included here might be particularly triggering based on different identity experiences, based on different folks' experience in the organization. How can we think about applying this kind of lens of cultural competency to the analysis as well? And so moving us into our promising practice, performance management levels can be written in a way that, again, encourages growth and offers clarity for how to continue to advance and reach proficiency at the next level, really avoiding any language that it feels like it's punishing folks or that it's kind of holding them to this unreasonably kind of high bar, any perfectionism built in. So there are some important shifts that we've highlighted on the screen that we can see in the red box below. So moving away from language that's around failure and instead kind of identifying targeted supports as an opportunity for there to be kind of some shared accountability on staff continuing to develop, right? So both like setting the bar on what success looks like through the framework, but also saying that there's an opportunity for this person to be coached and developed and supported in their role. We also see in this kind of emerging category, some language that emphasizes potential and the potential component in terms of developing key skills and highlights opportunities for continued support in their learning and development. And so again, both of these changes to the language kind of highlight a shift towards shared accountability and kind of staff member success while recognizing these ongoing opportunities for continued growth and development. And so thinking about kind of this practice that we're kind of engaging in here, I'm curious if you're thinking about kind of the common feelings or experiences of staff people that might associate with their performance review and how you might want folks to feel. And so would love to just see in the chat any reflections on kind of how this shift in language might impact a staff experience with the performance review process, considering again, this focus on growth and development in addition to this evaluation component. Any reflections on how this shift in language might land for folks in your organization? Seeing some reflections here in the chat around, again, shared accountability, but also thinking about where the power lies and the balance of that power. Can feel in this performance review process that the person being evaluated has less kind of power and agency in that process. And so there might be an opportunity through this competency framework to also kind of highlight the opportunity for individuals to lead their own growth and development alongside their managers and the support they're receiving. Yep, I love this. So also making it seem like there's opportunity for the org to support you, to partner with you in your growth and development, not to punish you for not meeting expectations. I really appreciate that reflection as well. Yeah, and this emphasis on possibility and collaboration. All right, so please continue adding those reflections in the chat. I'm going to pass it back over to Ensek to walk us through a couple of the key takeaways as we're wrapping up our time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, just some high-level key takeaways. There should be a number of ways to show evidence of outcomes instead of having that one right way. Oftentimes when there's that one right way and that one right way is not clearly codified, it can lead to lots of challenges. Would recommend focus of the system should balance a developmental coaching orientation still with that evaluation, not just strictly evaluative or not just strictly developmental. We want to make sure that we understand what our expectations are. Performance management levels should be written to encourage growth, offer clarity on how to reach that proficiency at the next level. And we don't want to have punish people or hold them to an unreasonable bar. And lastly, people with different positional power identities will experience the framework very differently. And so would encourage folks to consider pressure testing from multiple perspectives. How might the same framework, the same competencies be experienced depending on your identity, your level, where you might be. And so with that, we wanted to thank you for spending time together with us. We want to share with you what's next, what happens after this. So I've got a few things. Also feel very, very awkward that I offered to close, and then our session designers put my face right there, and that feels really weird. But here we are. This is part one of a 3-part. And so what we would love to invite you to do is join us for our next 2 webinars. The next one is on June 16th, same time, getting on path for anti-racist hiring. And you have 2 of some of our most incredible team members, Cornelius Lee and Justin Tendingham, who will be hosting Getting on Path for Anti-Racist Hiring. And then at the end of June, my colleague Lucito is co-hosting We're All for Transparency, but what about in compensation? That is a hot topic often within an organization, and so would encourage you to join us for these as well. We do have a lovely QR code here if you are interested. Lewis has also kindly put the link in if you would like to register for the next 2 webinars. The other way to stay connected with us, if this leaves you with a bunch of questions and you would like some follow-up tailored support, scan the QR code, schedule a free one-on-one consultation with one of us as a team member. Happy to explore ways in which we might be able to support if you have further questions about your performance competency. We do have a member of our research team, Lyle Hurst, on the call, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that a huge, very powerful tool in performance frameworks can be 360 tools, and we do tailored 360s. So that is an opportunity to explore that tool as well. We had the intention of doing some Q&A. We are over time, but I do have some time, so happy to stay on for a little bit if you would like. We would also love your feedback on today's session. It was very short, was not meant to be an end-all be-all, but hopefully you were able to take away some tidbits, but would love your feedback on today's discussion. Lewis, you're welcome to stop sharing the screen. On behalf of Jody and I and the rest of the Promise 54 team, we want to extend our gratitude for willing to spend your time with us. And without further ado, you're welcome to hop off and welcome to stay on and ask questions that you might have that we may or may not have answers to. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.